Do you know it takes about 28 days for liquid concrete to dry? Well, Miss Yoon's body was drenched in liquid concrete, and this was after being dead for 4 days. Her corpse was transferred to a different location, so even with the pungent smell emitting from her body, her killers were not deterred, and they went ahead to carry out their devious plan, all in the bid for her body to not be found. Tortured and beaten to an inch of life for days, and later beaten to death was not all this 15-year-old girl had to endure. Even at death, her face was set ablaze so she wouldn't be recognized. And then she was buried in wet concrete covered with dirt and rocks, so her body wouldn't be discovered. You might be wondering what this 15-year-old offense was and who her torturers and eventually killers were. You might even be thinking of a demented serial killer on a rampage, but trust me, it's far more shocking than that. In this video, we see how this young lady, with clear plans to make a change in her world, was brutally murdered by her fellow peers and buried in the most gruesome way possible. The start of the tragedy. In the quiet province of South Gyeongsang in South Korea, a young lady surnamed Yoon met 24-year-old Kim on a social networking service, and there they got talking. Miss Yoon, a young naive girl of just 15 years, believed and trusted everything this young man told her. As time progressed, Miss Yoon fell for all his wits and charms and decided to run away from home to be with him. On March 15th, Miss Yoon ran away from home to be with Kim, whom she met on the social networking service, and this was the beginning of a gruesome journey for her. The first few days being with Kim was quite normal, but that didn't last for long. Miss Yoon, along with 3 other teenage girls surnamed Yang, 16 years old, Heo and Chang, also 15 years old, had also run away from home, and were in the company of young guys surnamed Lee and Heo, who were both 24 years old, and another surnamed Lee, who was 25 years old. As runaways, they had to fend for themselves, and the guys forced the teenage girls into prostitution. The next 14 days were hell for Yoon, who was locked up and fed just once a day and forced to sleep with different men daily for money. After Miss Yoon ran away from home, her dad filed a missing person report, and the police formed a group to start the investigation to find her. During the search, Kim, who held Miss Yoon hostage for the past 14 days out of fear, decided to send her back home. Before she was released, Yoon was threatened by the young guys that if she should speak to anyone about her ordeal, they would find her and kill her. On her return, she looked so frail and malnourished, and this brought up lots of questions for the father. After a series of questions and assurance, young Yoon opened up and told her father in detail all she went through while in captivity. After hearing all his daughter had been through, he got so angry and wanted to report to the police, but young Yoon pleaded with him that if he should report, they would find her and kill her. She explained that the guys were scary and mean and would carry out their threat, so he stayed back and did not report to the police, which turned out to be the worst mistake he ever made. Back to hell. All was going well for young Yoon. She felt free and at peace. But this peace did not last long, because barely 2 weeks after being released, Miss Yoon and her father went to church, and this was where tragedy struck a second time. Miss Yoon and her father were Christians, and on the fateful Sunday morning they dressed up and went to church. On getting there, young Yoon had to be separated from her father because they were grouped according to age for the service. After the service, her father came out to discover that Miss Yoon had gone missing again. That Sunday, Miss Yoon found herself back in the arms of her assailants. She was thrown in the back seat of their car and driven to their hideout, which was a rundown motel in Busan, in the Changnyeong County province. Miss was locked up again and forced to engage in sexual activities about 4 to 8 times daily, and if she failed to do it, she was beaten severely and left without food or water for the day. On the 4th of April, a series of unfortunate events began when Miss Yoon was seen to have logged into her Facebook account by 25 years Lee. On discovering this, out of fear that they could be found, he beat up Miss Yoon so badly that she couldn't move or eat, and when Miss Yoon complained and wished to return home, she was beaten up mercilessly by the guys and even the teenage girls who were with her. On such a day that Miss Yoon complained or asked to be returned, the guys all beat her up to an inch of her life, and Miss Yoon felt like she would die, so she requested water from her assaulters, and one of the guys present there went and boiled water, and this very hot water was poured all over Miss Yoon's body, which led to several burns on her skin and her skin started peeling off. Her suffering did not end there on other days. Miss Yoon was forced to drink 2 bottles of soju drink, which was a hard liquor, and drinking this on an empty stomach as she was, hardly fed, would lead her to vomit, and her assaulters would force her to lick up the vomit from the ground and clean up all the mess she caused, after which she would be beaten up and punched for throwing up. Her tragic end. On this day, they forced a frail Miss Yoon to wrestle with them, and if managed to beat them, she would be released. Miss Yoon, even knowing she was too weak and might not survive this ordeal, decided to take her chances and fight the teenage girls, but they ganged up on her and beat her up even while down and barely alive. This did not stop the guys from kicking and punching her. Miss Yoon prayed for death, but unfortunately, she survived this ordeal. Though badly injured with broken ribs and bones, she was alive. On the 9th of April, the guys decided to play another game with her and asked if she were to die, who would she like to go to hell with her? Miss Yoon said 25 years Lee, because he was her greatest tormentor. But Lee, hearing this, was angry and started punching and kicking a weak Miss Yoon. He forced her to bend her head backward, exposing her neck, and he started punching her on her larynx so she would not be able to speak again. Even after this, he was still not satisfied, and he took a fan and started striking her on her abdomen, further cracking her ribs. After he was satisfied, they all got into a car to drive to the nearest store, and this was around 10 p.m. While driving, they asked Miss Yoon, who tied down and left at the ground of the back seat, who she would take to hell with her. And Miss Yoon said 16 years Yang. Yang, who sat at the back seat, started stomping with her heeled shoe on Miss Yoon, who was laying on the floor of the back seat, and others laughed as Miss Yoon screamed. When they got back, they left Miss Yoon in the car, where she had a cardiac arrest on the 10th of April and died in the back seat of the car. A tragic end to the 15-year-old teenager, but even after her death, her assaulters still showed no spirit of remorse or guilt. Rather, they decided to pour petrol on her face and set it ablaze so she would be unrecognizable, even if her body was discovered. After burning her body in the early morning of April 11th, they went to the orchard in Changnyeong County District and dug a hole where they buried her corpse. 3 days later, they returned and dug up her corpse and drove to a hill near the Hwagok Bridge. Here they dug another hole and threw her body in. But rather than just bury her, they poured wet concrete into the hole, which dried up with young Miss Yoon's body in it. And then they went ahead to cover it up with dirt and rocks. How young adults were able to conceive such evil thoughts and carry them out goes to show how unremorseful and evil her assaulters were. Justice. Not long after they killed and buried Miss Yoon, they struck again by luring a 47-year-old man and forced 16 years Yang to sleep with him. They recorded the act and decided to blackmail the man into giving them money, but the man thought it was all a scam, tried to escape. But unfortunately for him, he was caught and thrown in the back seat of his car, and then went ahead to beat him up and kept hitting him on his head. Even after several pleads from the man, they kept striking him. And all these blows led to his death, and the guys and teenage girls fled and abandoned him in the car, which was discovered by the police, and the assaulters were tracked and arrested in Daejeon, where they faced trial and were convicted for the death of the 47-year-old man. In Changnyeong, the police found a lead through the social chats between Kim and Miss Yoon. This led them to catch her killers, and another trial was held for the abduction and death of Miss Yoon on the 11th of November 2014, where the teenage girls were asked and denied knowing anything about the death of Miss Yoon, claiming they were also victims and not involved in any death. Kim was sentenced to 5 years in prison for luring out an underage to prostitute her and aiding in the disposal of her corpse. On February 13, 2015, the Daejeon District Court indicted the other guys responsible and 25 years old. Lee, along 24 years old Heo, were sentenced to life in prison, seeing as they were the primary assaulters of Miss Yoon, and the numerous injuries inflicted on her ultimately led to her death. 24 years, Lee was sentenced to 35 years in prison. After an appeal in April, Kim's sentence was reduced from 5 years to 3 years. Throughout the trial, the police could not tell Miss Yoon's father the full details of how she was found, because they feared it would be too much for him to bear, and this could lead to serious health issues for him, so they simply told him his daughter was found dead. As a parent, how would you react to such news? Were their sentences well-deserved, or do you think the court was too lenient in its judgment?